What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Project build series, where I take this Cutlass cruiser wagon that I found in this dude's backyard that's been collecting dust for a couple years and start resurrecting this thing. I'm building this car to be my next power tour car. I'm a big fan of wagons, and these cars are super nostalgic to me, so I really wanted to try and build one of these things. I'm a big fan of unique cars, and these ones definitely fit that bill. In the last few videos, you guys saw me tear this car apart. I built engine mounts for the 3000 and the F23 5-speed manual, built the exhaust for the turbo, then built an intake to actually get this thing placed where I wanted it to be. So now, in this video, we're going to be sorting out all the small stuff that people don't really talk about. It's the things like the heater core lines, the air conditioning, all the little oil feeds and stuff that get the oil to and from the turbo. So this video could be kind of boring, but otherwise, stay tuned. We'll just dive into this project and dig into all these little details. Well, after a lot of back and forth, a lot of test fitting, a lot of parts, I think I finally have a solution for the air conditioning system. So I don't think I've explained this that well, but this car never came with the newer compressors. This was an R12 car. So R12 is the old refrigerant that a lot of the older cars before 1994 used. I think 1993 was the last year for R12 for pretty much all of GM's cars. So this car is a 92, came with R12. And R12 is a better refrigerant in terms of how it exchanges heat, but it's not as good for the environment, so they switched it out to the R134A. So because I'm using the newer refrigerant, I wanted to use a newer compressor too, and because I'm using the newer engine, I wanted to use a matching compressor for it. So what I have down here is the V5 compressor. This is a variable displacement compressor. This means that there's no cycling. This thing is on or it's off. So when the AC is on, the compressor is on. So it doesn't need to turn on and off based off of how much pressure is in the system. It automatically compensates by changing the displacement of the compressor itself. This compressor is much quieter than the other one. There's once again, no cycling. It's probably a lot more efficient. I'm assuming it's a lot more efficient. Computer management for this is a lot easier to control too. It's gonna work the way it would if this were in a 1999 Buick Regal. So to use a newer compressor, I've got to use the right fittings on the bulkhead adapter there. So you can see inside of there, that's where those fittings will go into on this thing. And trying to find a way to make these things fit properly has been a bit of a debacle. To go from the compressor over here over to the accumulator over there, and also to the AC condenser up front as well here. So that's been a bit of a challenge. My original plan was to run this condenser, this black one here. This is from a 1994 car, and the issue I'm having with that though is that the fittings are all wrong with it. There's a bulkhead flange fitting there, and then over here it's a O-ring port, which is like a -10 or so, or a metric fitting. I'm not sure, but it doesn't match up to my liquid line on the car, so that's an issue. So I had to use an older one without the older fitting line. So I could change the liquid line, but it's hard to find these things. So the plan now is to use the AC condenser, the one in silver behind the black one, that has the right fitting for the liquid line over there. And then over here, it's gonna use the threaded fitting down here for the discharge. So for the feed into the condenser, it'll use that one. And I'm not sure how efficient this condenser will be, because it has a single row it goes into, whereas this one is like a double row. Again, this is a newer style condenser from a 94 car, so it's probably a bit more efficient. It is what it is. So I'm going to be using R152, so I don't think it's going to be a big deal. R152 is a little bit better than R134, so I think that that's going to work out just fine, and should be able to make something work out with this. So I'm going to use this condenser, keep the liquid line that's in the car, and use that compressor. And between these fittings here, this is kind of what they look like. This one here is the closest one that's going to fit the car. So my plan is to use this bulkhead fitting here to go to this muffler. Lessons learned from the Grand Prix, I'm keeping the muffler. And I'll need to cut this here and orientate this one the way it needs to go. So right now it's facing too far down if I bolt this on the car. So I need to cut this fitting here. And what I'll do is I'll use a compression fitting to get this angle on this one right where it needs to be. That way I can pretty much place this wherever I need to place it. And then I can't use the fittings on this side, and that's a bit of a bummer because this is an M10 port here, which is needed for the compressor sensor. And this is an M10 sensor port, so that's kind of disappointing that I can't use this because that's kind of important. This is where your high side pressure sensor bolts into the car. And the older style doesn't use an M10. It's like an SAE thread or something like that. And it's pretty much impossible to find a sensor style for that from what I've seen. They're switches. They're on or off. They'll tell you, does it have pressure or does it not have pressure? And I want to know what the actual number is. And actually the factory PCM for a 3800 would want that number too. So to actually make this thing fit into the car itself, under that condenser, I'm going to be using the 93 style port over here. So this is the part that will plug into the car, onto the condenser. And this has a port here, but this is more of this is the old R12 port for your fill port, so I can't quite use that. I'll use an adapter though to make this thing work with the R134, so it'll have a fitting like this one on there. And my plan is to basically cut these hoses and splice them together at the hoses. I'll cut this one over here somewhere, cut this one back here somewhere, and that'll give me all of this hose, all the space I need to locate this thing in the car. So I have a bunch of these fittings over here. So the goal is, this is a fitting for the compressor flange port. So this will allow me to cut that, and I'll use this compression fitting to get it right back where it needs to be. So that'll be perfect. I think that's going to withhold all the pressure this thing could possibly put out. And then also, because I don't have a sensor port somewhere, I bought this beadlock fitting with a sensor port on it. It's the M10, and this is the right one for, say, a W body, 99-ish Regal. So that's going to work out perfectly as long as I can get this beadlocked on there. And then I also bought another one before I bought this one, and I guess I have a spare now just in case I need it. So to put all this stuff together, I have a hydraulic hose crimper I bought online. It has good reviews. Don't know anything about it. Never heard of the brand before. Typical stuff you find at Amazon. Everything is just weird brand names. I have this hydraulic hose crimper I'll use in this thing to kind of get these angles right where they need to be. So if you're curious and you're doing this swap yourself, these hoses are number 8s. So AC hoses are usually numbered from what I've seen. So we have number 8 on the AC lines. These are number 8 beadlocks. FY, the Grand Prix is number 6. I was able to actually get a thread-in sensor port on that car, where this car being number 8, there's nothing that threads in, so this was the next best thing I could find for it. So first thing I'll do is I'll cut this port here, cut the hoses, put it in the car, and then start with the compression fitting, figure out what that's going to look like, and go from there. Okay, so this is working out pretty well. At least it looks like it's going to fit here. I had to find a smaller M10 bolt to actually go inside of that flange. But otherwise though, things seem to be clearancing everything fairly well. Now, I haven't bolted everything into the car, but I think down here is going to be kind of where it wants to go. This way I can still remove the starter if I need to, and it'll clear the fans too as well. So the way this was set up from the factory with this hose is that it was basically right over here, pretty much into the radiator. And it's because every compressor, every engine, they mount differently, different locations, different orientations. And this V5 compressor has multiple different ports that you could possibly use from the factory. All the other ones are capped off right now. I don't think there's any way I could actually uncap them. But there you can see there's another set of ports down there too. So depending on your orientation, this thing could have your flange any way you want it to be, possibly, I suppose. So I think this is gonna work. I'm gonna have it go straight down. I'm keeping the muffler here, so that's what this is, by the way. That's the muffler. It gets rid of a lot of that compression noise you hear from the AC compressor. I know that if I don't run a compressor muffler, it makes a ton of noise, and that's what's going on in the Grand Prix. I thought I broke something in that car when I got the AC working, but it turns out, or at least I'm pretty confident, it really is just the lack of a muffler in that car that's making it make all that noise. This side is going to work out okay for the suction side. It's not quite perfectly aligned. The hose is going to be twisted a little bit, but I think it's going to be okay. Clears the exhaust too as well, at least on the fittings and the hoses. And the AC compressor clears a little bit more than it used to. At least there's a gap. So I'll lock that down with these fittings. I'll just screw them down a little bit harder because right now they're just kind of finger tight. And then I can figure out where these hoses are gonna go. And I think this hose is gonna go through this hole right here. So kind of something like that. But yeah, this is gonna come up through there somewhere, possibly even come out a little bit before it goes in there. And then I have this one I already cut up too. So this is the port it's gonna go into. So I might have to cut that thing short, I'm not sure. But basically this is gonna go in, this will go in here. And somehow fit through that. There we go. So that's kind of how that's gonna go. So now that I see that, I'm learning this as I go, guys, so I haven't really planned this out that well, but basically I think what's gonna happen is that this hose is gonna get twisted down and do like a little loop as it goes back down, and I think that that's gonna be okay. Well, this isn't going as well as I thought it would. These fittings just don't seem to be the right size for this. I don't think that they should look like that. It just looks really awful. I'm really concerned that these are gonna leak because a 200 PSI blowout is gonna be pretty massive. It's gonna break stuff. Like, it's gonna make this thing fly up here and take out some of the stuff up here. So I'm not really sure if this is gonna work or not. The suction side of the system is not coming together well either. It looks like the thread size in this thing is different from the one that's on the compressor itself. So that must have changed between 94 and 93 as well. So I might have to put another suction side, clamp on this thing, same way I did this one over here. And hopefully that one doesn't leak too. So the condenser is in. That worked out nicely at least. So the fittings on both sides fit up nicely. Screwed in really easily. There's no issues with that at all. That seemed to work out pretty well. You can see the compression fitting is all on there too. That worked out nicely too. That all clears it all. That at least went smoothly too. We're taking 2 steps forward and a step back or two, but we'll get there eventually. All right, so today I'm going to be working on fixing these AC lines. I made a little mistake here with this one. So when it comes to AC lines, I just recently learned that there's a standard barrier and there's also a reduced barrier, so it's a smaller hose. So apparently these are all the smaller hoses. The inner diameter is all good with the fitting, but the outside diameter is pretty bad. This might still hold, but I don't want to risk it. It's not something I want to have flying around. This system sees about 200 PSI. If that thing does break somehow, 200 PSI is going to mean things are flying pretty hard, and that's going to cause some damage. I went ahead and just bought some reduced barrier fittings, so I'm going to be doing both lines apparently. And this one has a fitting on it. It's not quite the right size, but I've got an adapter that could work for this, so we'll try that out and hopefully get some sort of pressure sensor on this thing. So I'll go ahead and just cut these fittings here off. I might try and save the line, but thankfully I did cut enough hose here that I could just cut that whole section out and just not worry about it. So basically what I've done here is I've used the 3.1 liter or R134 flange, modified it slightly, and then used the other side for the condenser on the 93 hose and also for the dryer on the 93 hose. So I'll go ahead and cut these things up and go ahead and clamp them down. And this was my first clue that there's different sizes of fittings. We have the number 8 regular and the number 8 reduced barrier. So now that I know better, I won't make that mistake again. Now I've learned. All right, so I've got one of these fittings on here, and putting this on here was a lot more difficult than I thought it'd be. It's obviously a lot tighter against it. What's nice about these fittings is they have this little sight hole, so you can actually see if the rubber is actually fully engaged. Got to go ahead and do this other side too as well. It is a tight fit here, but I think I can make this work. It's not going to be pretty, but I think it's gonna work out. And I can always loosen this thing to kind of get a better angle on it. So I'm not quite sure what angle it's going to be at, but it's probably going to be something like this. And then I'll just have to wrap the exhaust here, clear it all. Once again, everything is a fight. Everything is not cooperating, but we'll get there. We'll make the progress slowly but surely. All right, so here's what I ended up with. Challenge here is trying not to cut this thing too short, but also not leave it long enough that you get a kink in here. And I think I finally hit the right kind of compromise here. So I think that that's going to work out. And I'm going to go ahead and just try and clamp this in here, try and squeeze that huge clamp in this thing. Worst case scenario, I can pull this thing out. I'll just mark these dot to dot and then make sure it lines up properly because I don't want to get this thing twisted at all. It needs to stay in this orientation. Otherwise it's not going to make that angle correctly. But I think I've got a winner here. I think this is going to work and not explode on me. So fingers crossed that I've learned my lesson. We're going to have a good outcome on this thing. Okay, I feel pretty confident in this one now. That one's looking pretty good. Yeah, it's much better than this outcome over here. So I'll just go ahead and swap that one out soon, and we'll be almost done with all this plumbing for this. And that will be a huge relief. So if you're doing this swap yourselves too, and you want to keep that V5 newer variable compression compressor or variable stroke compressor, it's a hard word to say apparently. What you have to do is use a compression fitting here. It's like a 3/4 inch line. It's a reduced barrier number 12, 3.1 liter hose here. Aim it down and then use the 3.3 hose and then all the other 3.3 components. Over here you have a number 8 reduced barrier fitting there. Going over to the 3.3 hose to the 3.3 condenser. So basically it's all 3.3 components until you get to the compressor itself, in which case you need to adapt the 3.3 line to the 3.1 line, and then the 3.3 line to the 3.1 line, and use all that length of hose you can. This other fitting here is like a 7/16 thread, I think, or 3/8. So I have an adapter for this too to go to the M10, I think, so that should work out. All right, so I've got that fitting in here now. That crimp is in. I think it's in a pretty good spot. Only concern is the radiator, and that's really going to end about right here anyway. You can see that down there is the bushing for it, or the isolator. So I think we're golden here on this. It shouldn't interfere with anything that I can see right now. One of the challenges with this fitting and this car being a number 8 size fitting, and I think LSs have this problem too. So if you're doing an LS swap and you're using number 8 fittings or AC lines, you can't find an M10 thread for your sensor. So if you're using that AC high side sensor, you can't quite get that thread. But I got a little trick up my sleeve here from coldhose.com. All these parts came from there. They were like the only ones who actually have this. So hard to find, but this is an adapter for the SAE to the metric fitting. You see it's got a bit of a gasket in there too, so that's awesome. That's a good sign because there is none on the other side. So I think this is going to be golden. And here you have the metric side. So we go from this larger, I think 7/16 thread to the M10, and this is beautiful. This is going on so smoothly. That's so perfect. So I'll get a wrench and tighten that down. So this is your high side sensor right here. It's a 5-volt sensor, so you have 3 pins there. So it's not a thermal resistor. It's just a good old sensor, and this should thread right into this. We are golden, dude. This is going so well. I just need to get an adapter for this high side service port to go to the R134, and probably for the low side too, we have that service port over there too. There's also a spare one here, a little bit easier to get to. That's actually probably a sensor port actually. But we don't need a low side sensor, we just need the high side. So AC lines basically done and wrapped up, looking pretty good. So with the air conditioning sorted now finally, it was time to start working on the heating part of the HVAC system in the car. One of the next things I want to work out here is the heater core lines. You can see that these things are very close to the blower motor. You can barely fit a finger or two inside of there. So this is pretty tight. So what I'll probably do here is have my heater core line come up this way. I've got some 90s that'll go down back to the heater core itself, which is kind of in this little corner over here. Yeah, so that's it right there. So they've got to come up from there up to here. So it's a bit of a mess. So if you're doing this, I think you could probably get away with using a H-body, like a pre-2000s H-body, so a Sabre, Park Avenue. C-body, H-body cars, they have a 90-degree fitting here. And they have a different bracket though too. I actually bought their fittings, but it doesn't fit this bracket, so I can't use that. And I want to use the W-body bracket because of the alternator. I have spares of these ready to go. One of them is like basically brand new, so I'd like to run that alternator. Plus it's just a better design for mounting if you ask me. You do have this weird situation here where you could send a bolt through the valve cover, but otherwise it seems like a better design because it's just so much easier to work on. Well, turns out I had to make a parts store run. Apparently I didn't have enough coolant elbows. I have 2 with me and I thought I had everything I needed for that, but apparently I have 2 of the lower ones and no upper ones. So Went out to O'Reilly's, picked up some of these, so I'm good to go for that. And then I'll be able to get that bracket in here. I think I'm gonna go ahead and just put in the heater core lines right here, right now, just while I'm here already, because I can actually reach them right now, and that's really nice. I really appreciate being able to reach things in the car, so I think that's important. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those heater core lines on now and get this thing all wrapped up, and we'll see it here in a second. All right, so after a bit of struggle, I finally have my hoses in here, and it's a good thing I took this bracket off because that would have been pretty much impossible with that in the way. So now I can actually start moving on to putting the bracket on and getting this sorted out. This power steering hose here is a real pain in the butt. I'm gonna try and get this thing in a spot where it's like kind of out of the way somewhat, so that way I can actually get some, some of these hoses here, or fit my fingers through here. It's such a tight fit. It's the theme of the car. It's a tight fit. So I think I'm gonna route this one up on this side of the power steering hose, get it going up this way instead of going out this way. I also need to get this thing converted from a 3/4 inch down to a 5/8. So I'll have to sort that out too. I have a fitting for that. I just don't know where I'm gonna put it yet. It'll probably be, I'm thinking this one's gonna go up this way on this side. This one's gonna go on this side, and I'll have that fitting somewhere in here. So we'll work that out. Down, and now we're golden. The fix, not a big deal. All right, let's get there. Get this in here. Okay, got that in there. So it turns out that this is so tight that there's no way I can fit a barbed 90-degree fitting in there. The problem is that it hits in here. So you have these connectors here for the blower motor. So I don't want to put something in the way that's going to damage it. So I'll just use some rubber fittings here. I'll probably bend those tabs and that thing so that way nothing pierces the coolant hoses, and we should be golden. All right, so I managed to find a hose that's gonna work for this thing. This is a hose that's for something. I'm not sure what it's for, but here's a part number. So if you've got to make a crazy tight bend out of 1/2 inch rubber or 5/8 inch rubber, I hope I got the right size actually. This should be it. So that's gonna be pretty awesome. So I'll just cut this thing pretty much right at the bend, just enough so I can actually get this thing in there, and then probably squeeze the bung all the way up into the bend itself a little bit and just not worry about it. And then just take off the extra material I won't need, and we'll have a good solid piece. We'll be good to go for this, and that solution will be solved for that section right there. So while I'm here, figured I might as well start working these fuel lines too as well, so I can start getting some of this other stuff knocked out here. So the way the fuel lines are going to work in this car is we have the main feed coming in over here. This is the 3/8 inch feed line straight from the fuel pump. It'll feed this fuel rail, almost like a deadhead here, but it's not really deadhead. Then we have another outlet coming out over here, so it tees off into these fuel rails, and this one will have a return, so it'll plumb back into there. The Grand Prix runs like that too as well, so I'm not really concerned about 2 cylinders having sort of a deadhead. It'll be all right. So I need to build a fuel line from here to the regulator. Have my fuel lines over here. Gonna be using this AN line. I already have one fitting on here already. Fairly confident that that's not gonna leak, but we'll see how that goes. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this fuel line right around here. I marked it with some tape. Also to keep the frays out of it. I'm not a big AN fuel line guy or AN line guy, but I'm trying to get into them. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start cutting this thing up and build this fuel line. Yep, that's pretty good, pretty flat. Obviously I'll have to blow these things out afterwards, but won't be a big deal. All right, so I've got my fuel line cut here, and I've got my fitting here, or this is how I build the fittings. I'm gonna go ahead and grab the fitting itself. So I have my fitting here, and I have my cool tool. I found these on Summit Racing. They're pretty sweet. I don't know how to build these things any other way. I'm spoiled. It's all I've ever done. So I know that doing it any other way is difficult. So I'm going to disassemble the AN fitting. It's a shame it looks so nice because I'm gonna kind of ruin it because I'm not spending that kind of money for aluminum stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and throw this thing inside of here. Figure out the spacing on it. So assemble it inside of here. Throw this on. And what this is going to do is it's going to keep all those braided edges from getting caught and prying themselves out. I have an example of another line that was done without it, and it is awful. It's not my line. I didn't do it like this. And you can see here, all these edges are just blown out, you know, and you don't want that. And maybe it would seal properly, but who knows. So got that in here. Gonna go ahead and throw this inside of the clamp. And what I like to do is I like to twist it as I throw it in there. And you can kind of look into the one side and see how close it is. Yep, so we're pretty much golden now. So I can go ahead and unclamp it and see my result. So no frayed edges coming out of it, pretty clean. Now I can go ahead and assemble the rest of the line. I'm gonna lube this up, obviously. One of the challenges here is keeping this thing clean and, you know, not damaging it. So I'm gonna do the best I can with what I have. So alternatively, I did do some damage, but once again, not that concerned about it. Not perfect, but it's good enough for who it's for. It's a little long, but otherwise I think it's gonna work. All right, well, I ended up taking apart that fuel line again and just redoing it. I cut it about 2 inches shorter, and that seemed to help out quite a bit. It's not hitting this manifold anymore. There's plenty of clearance here, so it does stick out a little bit, but some things are just gonna stick out. That's the way it is, right? So I also went ahead and assembled this one. I didn't have all the fittings I thought I had, but I figured I might as well use the ones I have because I've got so many AN lines and fittings that there's no point buying new ones when I can make this stuff work. And it doesn't look that bad. I decided to do a upward bend on this thing just to clear the exhaust a little bit more, keep the heat away from it, and just generally make it easy to install and remove. Because if I did a straight shot, it would be a chore to get perfectly correct, and you know, I figured I might as well just embrace the curve and just stick with it. At least it somewhat makes sense that it would do that. If you imagine that these are from a supercharged car, they would have some sort of whoop-de-doo over the intake anyway, so obviously a lot more than this, but who's gonna know? All right, so I got the last fuel line on there for now. So I went ahead and connected the nylon fuel line to the fuel rail, built that fitting, and now the fuel rails are pretty much all set. Yeah, we're making progress slowly but surely. Again, no real rush right now on this thing. I just want to move on to the next part of the project. I am really looking forward to wiring this car, so I want to move forward towards that. So we'll catch you tomorrow someday, probably. Tomorrow? Day after that? We'll make some more progress. You'll see it in the same video. All right, see you soon. All right, so gonna be working on getting oil to the turbo now. I'm still waiting for the last flange for the oil drain out of this, so I can't actually plumb that up to the oil pan yet. But at least the next thing I can do here as far as plumbing goes is work in the oil drain or the oil feed. So the oil feed is gonna come up somewhere up this way, and then over here, and then probably back through this somewhere, and tie into the turbo here. So I have this oil feed right here. It looks like it's about the right size. These ones do tend to come with some sort of restrictor. This is a journal bearing turbo, so you don't want to run a restrictor on this thing. So I'm going to drill out this feed line for 1/4 inch because you know, you want to give this thing as much oil as it needs. Then I have a 5/8 inch drain on it. I think 5/8 is a little too small, but this is what people usually run. The people have told me I'm crazy for running a 7/8 inch drain line on the Grand Prix. So I'm gonna try 5/8 and see how that goes. Worst case scenario, we'll have bigger problems. So worst case scenario is not good, but we'll worry about that later on. And I know this turbo leaks oil already past the seal, so as long as it's not a crazy amount, I think I'll be okay with it. For the turbo drain, I managed to find a fitting that I liked. This one has an O-ring on it already, so that's really nice. And it is a square fitting this time too, so it's a square opening, just like the turbo in this case. So this is gonna work out fine. And the theory of the O-ring, to me at least, is that you don't need a gasket there. The O-ring is your gasket, so that'll be awesome. So I'll bolt this thing on and get this turbo drain line routed to where it needs to be and get that thing out of the way. To feed the oil to the turbo, we have obviously the fitting on the turbo. We're using the -4 AN line, so a 1/4 inch AN line internal. I have a 1/4 inch NPT. Is that 1/4 inch or yeah? I think that's 1/4 inch. Yeah, 1/4 inch NPT adapter to the -4 AN line. So I have a bunch of these fittings here. I'm going to be using to basically tee off of the sensor port and then use that to supply the oil feed to the turbo. I also still need to have a sensor there, and that's going to give the ECU all the data it needs. But I also still need another sensor for the gauges in the car because I want to keep the gauges working. So I need to get another sensor. So I need to have basically 3 outputs off of the single input. So it's going to be a mess of fittings, but I think it's going to be okay. This is all leftover parts from the Grand Prix, various iterations of this, because it has actually the exact same thing going on. Thankfully, there's tons of space in this car. So here's where the oil feed comes from. It's there by the power steering line. So that's the stock sensor. I'm going to be using that one too. So I'll just reuse that sensor. Feast your eyes on the tree of horsepower. On this tree grows 2 fittings right here, and then the AN line to the turbo. So that's about how this is going to go. Trying to fit this stuff in here is a lot of work, and I'm really hoping I got these things tight enough, but not too tight, where they don't leak because they're not tight enough, but also they're not too tight in that they're going to crack the filter housing. I've done that before, so I don't want to do that again. If this gives me an issue, I think I will just go to a manifold type of fitting and just put that in a firewall too. I think this is going to work out fairly well, hopefully. So I'm going to go ahead and put the other sensor on here too and tighten these things up. Put the oil feed from the turbo in. So with that, most of this plumbing is finally done in this car. Getting this AC system sorted was a huge relief off my back, so I'm glad I got this done. So hopefully you guys liked this. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.